Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and today I'm joined by David Josef Volodzko. He's the news editor and senior writer at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and he also has an awesome Substack called The Radicalist. David, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but I used to work at FIRE for a little time.
I didn't know that. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was there during the expansion. So for a lot of people who don't know, FIRE they basically used to concentrate on free speech cases on college campuses. So they would take schools to court if they were infringing on the First Amendment of of their students, and then also they would push a culture of free inquiry and expression. Citing, John Stuart Mill, quite a bit. And then a few years ago, they expanded their mission from just doing college stuff to taking on speech cases at the culture at large. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of the expansion, which was kind of insane. To go from concentrating on colleges, and then there were so many new hires and stuff, and I was a new hire, but FIRE has definitely shown itself to be, I think, what the ACLU was at one point, at least when it comes to free speech, or what the ACLU should maybe try to get back to, although I don't know if they necessarily need to because money issues. And I don't want to put you in a position to discuss the ACLU. I just want to say how great FIRE is.
Well, you're pushing against an open door. I agree. I mean, FIRE is fantastic, very supportive of the mission. And, there seems these days to be a lot of job security, you could say. Political climate.
No, totally. Can you just give me 1 second? I got to go. I have 2 kids that are going a little loud. I don't know if you're picking up on your end, but the thing with this podcast is you never know where it's going to go or how intimate Lou's life you're going to get into as a listener or a guest. So my apologies.
No, it's fine. I have mine turns 3 in November. So
oh wow,
she's at that age as well.
Yeah. Is it just one, or do you have multiple?
Yeah, just one. She just recently started speaking in paragraphs instead of words. Like now you ask her a question and she gives you her life story, which is a good thing, I guess. But she also has this thing where and also a good thing, but everything is slower now. She wants to do everything by herself, which is fantastic. I totally support that. But as you can imagine, the amount of time it now takes to do things, when she's like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this by myself. I'm like, oh, yeah, great. Okay, we're not leaving now for half an hour.
Yeah. My son, my oldest there's a pair of skates that he wants to put on by himself, and then with the skates comes all of the equipment, and then so I have to go in, and they throw their shit all over the place. So who knows where one elbow pad is versus another? So I'm Mr. Scavenger Hunt. I need to go find this stuff, get it to him. But I think I'm actively saying in my head, like, okay, to try to take in those moments, like be along for the ride, even though it takes so long. Like try to put yourself at peace, be patient, because I know one day life's going to move on way faster than we want. But yeah, in the moment it's a little. I might not be as patient as you are. So.
Yeah, and one of my friends, she has 3 brilliantly successful children. And one day I asked her, what was the secret? What did you do? And she said, well, the secret is I didn't do things at all. I sat back and I really encouraged them to do things for themselves from an extremely young age. So mine seems to have just assumed that for herself. And I remember that conversation I had with my friend, and I sit back and I'm like, okay, self-reliance is an incredibly powerful thing to give yourself. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to patiently, that gets me through moments when I might otherwise be like, we really need to get out the door. And I'm like, wait a minute. Okay. So as well as what you said, as well as, cherishing the moments for yourself.
Yeah. It's a thing where, it's like my parents have a, completely different perspective, on this. Like when we go to their house, which I've been enjoying, quite a bit, uh, they're absolutely in love with my kids, and my dad says, "They're here, let them go crazy." So,
Mm,
like, stuff that I don't want them to do in our house, my parents are totally cool with them doing it.
yeah.
And I think one of the things that makes it, I think, easier, on my parents, not only 'cause they're older and more chill, but, I think they both have experienced, like, hearing loss, over the years, like, they're in their 70s. And my ears, are so sensitive. So, like, stuff dropping on the floor, being thrown, or pings and pongs, coming all over the place, really just, makes my skin crawl, and, puts me in like in a fight or flight sort of, position. Whereas my parents, it just, they don't hear it, so my kid, so then I realized, like, oh, I'm the problem, really. If I just let my kids go and just leave, then everything will be all right. Dad's not around just saying, stop this, stop, put that down, don't do that, blah blah blah.
Mm, that's funny. That kinda reminds me, I have an inside joke with my wife, which is that when our daughter's older and she's more disrespectful, it won't rub me so much the wrong way because I'm not sure I'll be able to understand half of what she's saying if it's in a language that I don't speak that well.
Mm,
So I'm like,
yeah.
"Alright, I'll have a kind of, like, built-in tolerance because 'cause it'll just go right over my head."
I'm actually trying to do a work on a bit about, the stuff that my kids are saying to me when they get angry. You know,
Mhm.
like obviously it's, words that, aren't that bad, but for them, these are like the ultimate curse words, like my kid, saying like, there was one time he got so upset with me, and I sent him to his room, and I could hear him talking to himself, like kind of talking, as you would, like, as an adult, like saying what you really wanted to say, to like your boss, or your ex-girlfriend or something like that. And he's like, "Oh, daddy's a mean guy. He's mean. And I'm not, he's stupid. He's a stupid one by blah, blah, blah." And like, I mean, in a way, it's like that dude's saying, like, the most horrific things that I could possibly think to say to someone, but he doesn't have the vocabulary, but he has all that, that young, the young animosity, and
Mhm.
maybe rightfully so. Maybe he's justified in thinking about that.
That's hilarious.
Well, I don't know
Yeah.
if your daughter has, put a curse on you yet, but that happened to me the other day. The, boys were upset with me, and they came down and they said that we're gonna give you bad dreams. So, yeah.
Really?
So, yeah, so I have that going for me,
That's fantastic.
Yeah, because yeah, they've been going through, they've been having nightmares, and we've been talking about nightmares, and mommy bought them, like, dream catchers and stuff, and we were talking about that, um and so I guess that was, sort of uh, in the front of mind, for all of us. And then, yeah, they're going to put bad dreams in my head because they didn't like the way that I, had to, discipline them. So, but enough about enough about my kids. For all of you who tune in, for parenting advice, I got nothing. I really have nothing for you guys. Um, but I wanted to have, David on, for a number of reasons. For one, his Substack is awesome. The Radicalist. You go into depths that I didn't think were humanly possible. Some of the subject matter that you go into. One piece in particular is where you went through. Um, I don't know if it was 11 or 12 writers from the New Yorker, and to determine whether they are racist or not according to the rules of, I guess, racism. Um, and I'm looking, and I read this thing, and I think I forget. I was only a couple of them examples in when I, when I messaged you. I was like, "Hey man, I really want to have you on my podcast. I haven't finished reading this yet, um, but could you, maybe you could, talk a little bit about, how that came about, and whatnot."
Um, yeah, as some listeners may be familiar, there was a scandal recently with regard to Doreen St. Felix, who she wrote an essay that was rather innocuous about the Sydney Sweeney ad campaign that got a lot of attention, where she says she has good genes and a few other things, and people accuse Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle of being racist, if not fascist Nazi. And Doreen St. Felix wrote an essay about it, and she was, if you read the essay, I think it becomes immediately clear to you that most of the people criticizing her didn't read the essay, because her essay, I thought, was fairly reasonable. I mean, I don't agree with her views, but nothing in there really offended me. As I wrote in my essay about that, if I read this and I didn't know anything else about her, and I saw her at a cocktail party, I'd probably go over and say, "Hi, I read your essay. This seemed nice," or something. Um, but then somebody went and, the internet did what the internet does and dug up a lot of her old tweets on X, and it wasn't good. It was just, it was sheer racism, old school racism, the good stuff. And so then I looked at that, I looked through some of that, and I wanted to point out that it seemed like people were being unfair to her because what they were saying about her original essay just wasn't, essentially, as I said before, it just seemed as if nobody had actually read it. But then, yes, if you look at those tweets, there's a real problem here, but I don't come to the same conclusion as many other people, which is essentially sort of this, we just went through years of cancel culture and everyone complaining, and then you just see it flipping the other way again. And this just reminds me of something that I touched on in the essay, which, with regard to racism, we went through an even longer period of opposing racism, and it feels, and now that the solution we seem to, at least some of us seem to have fallen upon, is, well, let's just flip things around. Now it's the white people's turn, I guess, or something along those lines. And so there's a kind of like condoned racism in the correct direction, you could say. So, and but that's not what I think Doreen St. Felix is doing on her X. It's just, like I said, the old school variety of racism. But I thought, how many of these other writers do they have like her, or just uh, which is what I ended up writing the piece about. Racist according to the rules that have come to be used today to describe so many people as racist, who I think, in fact, often it's not. But then there'll be an argument, some Marxist superstructure analysis about, well, for instance, minority groups cannot be racist because racism is, to use the old formula by Patricia Baidal-Padva, racism is power plus prejudice, that old formula. So without the power, and minority groups, they just don't have power. None of them have power. Where you have to have power as a group. So it's not enough to be Oprah. Like, she doesn't have power and so you get into this analysis where, Black people cannot be racist, even if, for instance, you have examples of individuals killing other people because of their race, for example, which has happened in recent U.S. news cycles. Or, on the other hand, you have individuals who are doing relatively, harmless things. Older people, for instance, using words that are no longer in use and they didn't know any better, and then they get accused of being horribly racist individuals. But good at heart people. So this just doesn't track with anything that makes sense to me, is calling these kinds of things. But I explained at the beginning of the essay, okay, I'm going to use these principles that we've all kind of become aware of recently, these sort of how you assess what makes a person racist in the contemporary sense. And I'm just going to remove one piece from this formula, just one little piece, the piece that is the Marxist superstructure analysis that says, you can't apply these rules to us. We can only apply them to you. So things like, impact over intent, or, you might use a phrase and then somebody will say, oh, did you know that the etymology of that term actually goes back to a time when slaves were, and therefore you're being racist because you just use that term. And the fact that you didn't know is not an excuse, because impact over intent. And okay, well, if we were to just do that, or the kind of symmetry test where you just replace white for black and play it back for sound, and just see, would you speak that way about any other group? When we talk about whiteness, would you talk about, the Jewishness that is conspiring to hold down certain groups, that has power and all, the way that whiteness is described. So just take that one piece out and just say, the simple question is like, would you like to talk about any other group in this way? Do you consider it racist? Just turn it back on itself. And if you just hold these individuals up to the same standards by which they run around accusing others of racism, what you find is that virtually every single one of them is very racist in the way that they talk about others. Now, I think that last point might have been lost on some readers. I think some readers came away saying, like, okay, all of these writers are objectively racist, which is not exactly what I was saying. I think some of these writers that I list are probably decent people at heart that you would not mind, spending an afternoon with, having a beer with, whatever. It's just that they're being hypocrites. It's not the same thing as being
Yeah,
racist in the
according
old school sense. It's not that, right?
yeah, according to the rubric, and I think you had at least one where it was, like, iffy. I don't know if it was, like, Zadie Smith might have been one who,
Yeah, she's evolved on her views. She talks about how when she was younger, there were certain musicians that she wouldn't even listen to because they were white and it disgusted her.
but
But then she said, I mean, her dad was white, I believe. And
well, that's it. Yeah, that's the thing that I always find, interesting. In particular, it's like a Nicole, what's her name?
Nicole Hannah
From the
Jones, the
Nicole Hannah from the 1619
yeah,
Project, like her mom's white, and from the black friends that I have, many of whom are, if we could be specific, foundational Black Americans, uh, who tend to be, at least my friends, at least, tend to be conservative or the libertarian bent. What they often what often happens is it's like there's almost like a kind of, I wouldn't even call it like an overcorrection, but it's like you kind of have like there are some figures who seem to be trying to make up for the fact that one of their parents is white, where it's like, I'm going to be super, kind of like, super militant, like in my blackness. But it's like, yeah, but you grew up with a white mom and a black dad. Like you're in a mixed, you're in a mixed family. So it's like you're kind of like trying to compensate for something that I don't think a normal person would be like, oh, you need to compensate for, as opposed to just accepting,
mhm.
yeah, this is your, if you have a complicated, history. But, yeah, like with Zadie Smith, yeah, like Zadie Smith's dad, is white. And then I think her husband is white, and it's like,
That's
okay,
another thing. If you look, you find that with a lot of these, uh, and for lack of a better term, anti-white racists, you see that they are married to like white guys. Just like on the other side, you look at a lot of those like white nationalists or Proud Boy type individuals, and it's like, oh, huh, his wife's Asian. Isn't that interesting?
Asian, yeah, yeah.
Or some, yeah, it's a very common trope, their pattern. But
They're taking down the enemy from the inside, that keep your enemies,
yeah,
enemies, closer to you.
so gross. They're like it, but I don't think that it's that. th- I think what it is, it just reveals how much they do or don't actually believe some of the things that they're saying. Like I think that for some of the individuals on both sides, but I'll just focus on the left for now, and I think the right wing racists are pretty well known at this point. The left, it's for some of, I mean, there is some element of what you say that is accurate, I think, but then also I think there's for some of them, it's almost a kind of like intellectual jujitsu,
Hmm.
and they get so wrapped up in it. I know this for a fact from personal experience because as an undergraduate, I before I after I ultimately changed majors and ended up in literature. And in literature, you're just constantly writing these essays. And this was like 20 years ago, but even back then, some of the things I was seeing were like proto woke. It was already there, and we just didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. But looking back now, I'm like, oh, I remember. I remember some moments that stand out so clearly now. I'm like, it was already happening, and I was learning this kind of like language. It wasn't so
Hmm.
much the quality of your argument or what you were saying, but it was learning how to speak in this language in a certain kind of English major, academic, intellectual way. Sort of how if you listen to enough woke activists, you start to pick up on their vocabulary, but not just their vocabulary, like how they phrase things, how they, you know, talk about things such as like holding space and black bodies and things like
Mhm.
this instead of just like regular terms for the same things.
Right.
And I started to learn the vocabulary. And I remember there would be moments where um, professors would consistently praise the papers that had been written that way well, regardless of the like. I remember there was one student who their things seemed to be just like pulling 2 names out of a hat. It was like, you know,
Little Mad Lib kinda.
Shakespeare and Kierkegaard and how, the Shakespeare was actually trying to communicate Kierkegaardian. No, he wasn't, but okay. But these 2 names are just they're both intellectually respected, and you mash them up, and then you just talk about them in this language, and the
Mhm.
professors ate it up, and if you learn to speak that way, it was just very successful. So what I'm trying to say is that I think some of these people have come out of that culture, and they've learned to speak in a certain way. It's almost as if yeah, it's almost like a kind of intellectual Brazilian jiu-jitsu that they're doing, and they're very good at it, but it doesn't mean that they take it home with them.
Right.
They leave the dojo, and they go home to their possibly white husband, and they don't have any nasty, actually racist feelings about this individual. But
Mhm.
at work, they're very good at their jujitsu, and they're very, so I this isn't true of all of them, and I'm obviously just speculating here, but I think that for some of them, it's just a cynical game of an intellectual game that they play, you
Well,
know?
but, and I think too, I think, the element of, they have, like, their own language, this, academic language, and they're often speaking to each other, about it. So, so it's kind of like, I don't know, I remember hearing there were, like, fans of Star Trek who, learned Klingon, and it's like, well, if you know Klingon, you're gonna be talking to other dorks. I'm sorry, guys, I know a lot of Star Trek fans out there, but, um, you're not gonna go to the supermarket and talk to the cashier in Klingon, you're gonna
Mm,
you're gonna, be hanging out with, wherever you guys hang out
mhm,
To speak Klingon, and when you're used to having these discussions and you're being patted on the back, for putting together these, dumb sentences that sound smart, and you're having your, papers, republished, and, in all these, academic journals, and all that, you're you're not ultimately, having an exchange with quote unquote real people, right? Because when I was going through all of the authors that you had, they were all at the New Yorker, and many of them I'd never read their work before, but reading some of this stuff, I was just thinking like, oh, if that guy ever said that to me, I'd say, I'd call him an asshole, and there would be no no reason for me to obfuscate, my, hegemonic blah blah blah. I'd be like, no, dude, you're a fucking asshole, and your writing sucks, and what you're saying
yeah,
is complete bullshit. And you know what? You're really lucky you know, that the quote unquote white people that you roll around with are okay with you wanting to rid the world of whiteness and all that, as opposed to calling you out on your bullshit, because that wouldn't work with, people with self-esteem, and a spine. And I feel like I think one of the really good things that's been happening over the past few years is that those people who actually hold, like, racist beliefs are coming up against people and saying like, no, no, I'm not going to be treated that way, and I'm not going to allow you to redefine words to um uh, to give you the power to then treat me that way. Like you brought up, like I've heard this before, this redefining of the word racism, power plus prejudice. And it's like, oh, you can't do that. You can't just redefine a word to make, so you and your, cohorts can feel better about being racist against people. Um,
mhm.
so
I
that's
mean,
my little soapbox rant. Yeah.
I think that Patricia I don't know this for a fact, but I wonder if Patricia Bidal-Padva, who came up with that formulation, wasn't riffing off of, I wanna say Susan Brown Miller, but I think that's wrong actually. But it was a radical feminist who came up who, the concept that so many of us have, like so much of the rest of what we're talking about, so many of us have just accepted as truth, which is that, uh, rape is not about sex, it's about power. which makes sense if you kind of think about it. But then for a second, you're like, wait a minute, but does that mean that victims are like a random distribution of attractiveness because it's not really about that at all? It turns out that's not true.
Mhm.
So the power analysis, where does that come from? And it turns out, yes, it happens to come not from some sociological study or survey they did to try to understand what are the causes of this. It was one Marxist radical feminist woman who was saying, yeah, it's a power. It's all about power. Like that's what they're doing. This is actually just more sort of like capitalistic oppression of, and I think that there is actually some truth to the power analysis, but it's been taken to the point where it's like, no, that's all this is about. And the same thing with race. I don't I don't think we should be so quick to dismiss the idea that prejudice plus power is a meaningful way of looking at this. Power is a part of the equation. You can't overlook the fact that when a man is violent toward a woman is not the same as when a woman is violent toward a man, or white and black, considering the sort of historical, institutional power that whites have had. You can't just say, "Oh, well, it's exactly the same. It's racism is racist," right? But on an individual level, I think it's important that we should just all try to treat each other with basic respect and not talk about things like all of these writers are doing. They're just getting away with it. And you know for a fact that if any of them was doing it about other groups, they wouldn't for a second have the position at the New Yorker. Not for a
Mhm.
second.
Well, yeah,
Uh, and I
well,
go
that's
into that
yeah,
in one of the essays about how there was actually a conscious effort by David Remnick to
right.
address a lack of non-white writers, and what they seem to have done as a correction in a way of centering black voices is to center a bunch of black writers who are just talking liberally about in racist ways, frankly, about white people, which doesn't again is not really a solution to the problem. It's more just flipping things around. I
Mhm.
mean, that doesn't feel like progress to me.
Well, and also they're all, kind of talking about white people in the same way. So it's funny, like uh, Remnick's decision to bring in, these, voices of color, but yet they all kind of have one voice, It's like
Mm.
they all seem to be, college educated. Seems like quite a few of them probably dated white people, or in the case of Doreen St. Felice, had some, I guess, bad experiences in college with white guys, falling in love with white guys and just having her heart broken, and then later on wanting to, like, you know bring down white men, so whatever their psychological uh, stuff that they're dealing with. Uh, but yeah, like, you read this and I'm like, this seems like you know, you want to open up the writers that you're bringing on to the New Yorker, but it doesn't seem like they necessarily represent, the, what, 13% of the country that happens to be, black. They seem to be speaking for a really tiny percentage of even that.
Oh yeah. This is not just an issue. I mean, I know that they have supporters, of course, but I don't personally know any people who this resonates with, of people that I know in the Black community. Or for that matter, if I turn the page and I think about the Latino community in America, my wife is Latino, for example, and her family, and I talk to them about things like, but they're not American, so they're not tapped into
Oh,
all
yeah.
of these culture war things. I ask them things like about Latinx, for example, or whatever, Latinx,
Right.
however, a word that you can't even pronounce in Spanish already tells you what everything you need to know about that word. Um, and, yeah, and they're like, what?" And I'm like, "Okay, so who are these people talking to?"
Right.
When I forget the statistics, but it's quite stunning if you were to pull up the numbers, like how many, Latinos in America, have ever even heard of this word. It's quite
Yeah.
low, I don't remember the numbers, and then actually use this word. My favorite story is I was listening to an NPR podcast episode once that was all about Latinx. Um, you should go I don't know the name of it offhand, but you should go find it if you can, and there's a few vignettes in the story, right? The whole thing is being done by a panel of, there's like a black disabled trans individual. There's a non-binary. It's a very
Two-spirit.
it's a
Someone's gotta be
very
spirit there, yeah.
diverse panel, but diverse only in a way that is actually not that diverse because they're all like that kind of group and identity. So matrix, you can intersectional identities. And anyway, people who let's say you would just assume they probably identify as Latinx, probably. And they were all Latin origin, right? And so they're the ones that are walking you through these stories of vignettes. But then at the very end, they decided to go around in a circle and just give their, how do you identify? Not even any of them. They were all, I'm Latino, I'm Latina. Of course, the trans individuals clearly in line with their identity use the Latino or Latina as it aligns with their, they don't want a neutral identifier. And then all the rest, none of them use Latinx. I was like, isn't that something?
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't edit that out.
I'm writing a piece about, I guess it came out that Democrats want to reach more people, or at least perhaps reach voters that they potentially lost during the last election. So there's like a number of words that they want stricken from their from their throats, I guess.
Saw that.
And let's see. Let me see.
Was this the Third Way document?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, when I first see something like that come up, I'm like, "Come on, you got to be kidding! You got to be kidding me! Like, why would?" It sounds like it sounds like a parody, and also it's like you're putting this out into the public as well. So you're telling the public, we're not going to be using these words anymore because we want to, we want you to identify with it. We want you to come back. And for me, the way that I look at it, a lot of people were saying like, "Oh, that's good." Democrats are making it's a really good move on the Democrats' part. If they want to woo voters, back over to them. And the way that I see it is like, you should speak and use the words that you believe in. If this is the way that you see the world, then that's the language you should use and how you see the world. Like, if you're a person who, in spite of the fact that Latinos and Latinas don't identify with Latinx, and only perhaps a really small percentage do. But if that's if you see the world as everyone is Latinx, then keep using Latinx. Don't. I mean, you're basically just openly lying and saying like, okay, I do believe in chest feeders, and people with people who get pregnant, and and all that. But I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to use that because I want to lie to you, and I don't want your vote.
Then they're just going to end up furrowing deeper into even more annoying and alienating ways of talking about subjects when you, like, even already where it is now, even people who aren't like steeped in this kind of stuff, just your regular American voter, hears these phrasings and they're like, I can tell you're being racist, but you're finding a way to kind of, and that's annoying. And if you go even deeper into that language, it's not going to change the underlying viewpoint that you believe in. You're just going to find even fancier and more ridiculous ways of phrasing it. It's kind of like that skit by, I think it's Ricky Gervais, where is it Ricky Gervais? Where he's talking about like I think it's Louis C.K. Yeah, he's saying like, when people say the N-word, I hate the N-word. I don't mean the actual N-word. I mean the N-word. Because like he basically says like, just say the shitty things you want to say to people. Don't like say it in some other way and then make me have to do the math myself.
You put that word in my head. You made me think of that word. Yeah, because you said it. Yeah,
and it's like, like if you're woke, we may not agree, but just say the shitty things that you think, and then I'll say things that you think are shitty, and maybe we can like hash it. But don't play these silly word games where you think you're like, you think you're doing your jujitsu and outmaneuvering me, and I don't understand. And then you turn around and you say, no, you're wrong. I'm not really talking about white people at all when I say we need to eradicate whiteness. No, you're mistaken. No, you don't really know what CRT is. You don't have a degree in this, and you didn't go to law school. So
yeah,
I think people are less and less persuaded by these types of arguments.
Oh, 100%. And some, oh, wow. Okay. Some of the words, I haven't looked at these over the past couple of days, but let's see. Othering, microaggression, Microaggression is interesting because it's like, but wait a minute, how long did people try to push microaggression as something that seriously needed to be looked into? Like how many lessons on college campuses, how many, corporate, meetings had to be made, over this idea of microaggression, right? So, okay, so if you don't want to use the word microaggression anymore, okay, so do you still believe that asking somebody where they're from is bad? Because that was a microaggression, right? Mispronouncing somebody's name. Somebody has a farm. Like before we started this, I asked David, "Is it Volodzko? Is that how you say the name?" Um, there are all different sorts of ways. I bet people have
Mm.
pronounced your name in the past. I mean, weren't you microaggressed when that happened? So it's just it's so wild. It's not like I don't know. What's that, oh god, what was that medicine that they were giving to, pregnant women who, were having, like, nausea and ended up, the babies were being born.
Thalidomide?
Thalidomide, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
These words aren't like thalidomide where it's like, "Oh my god, this is terrible. We can't use this, ever again." It's
Mm.
like, no, you still want the babies with the flipper hands and the feet. You just wanna find another way to produce them, you know?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What a terrible, terrible, metaphor I just came up with, uh,
Thalidomide babies.
yeah, let's get rid of the little we want the flippers, we don't wanna use the thalidomide. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
BIPOC, allyship, incarcerated people, instead of criminals, cisgender. Oh, wow. They wanna get rid of cisgender. Man.
that's interesting. Some of these terms, what's interesting about it, other than, what we're talking about here with the sort of like the deceptive language games that they're playing. Another kind of language game that has been really kind of heartbreaking for me to witness is because I almost went down a different path in life into therapy. And so even though I didn't, I probably did go deeper into that than most people, a little more familiar with some of the methodology and these terms that have been coming out in recent years,
Mm,
straight out of therapy, like microaggressions and safe spaces and trigger warnings and all of these, and talking about intergenerational trauma. And what I've noticed is that in every single case, what's happening, the pattern that I see, is that all of these things, if you look at them in the therapeutic context, in the original context, I should say, because even therapy now has been wokeified to the point that now, even in the therapeutic context, it's used in the woke way. But in the original sense, these were essentially training wheels to get you, or like a kind of crutches to get you back on your feet.
mm,
It was never meant to be like, okay, this is how you're walking for the rest of your life now, and everyone else is expected to make adjustments too. No, the idea was no one's going to adjust for you. So here's some crutches. You need to get back to walking like everyone else, because
mhm,
no one else. We're not going to move into a world where we're just going to have a bunch of people with crutches walking around. So, like safe spaces, trigger warnings, things like this. Those are temporary as you're getting out of that state of that sensitivity. Now it's just you stay there forever, I guess.
mm.
You never, if you have a thing that's your trigger, then you just always want to have those trigger warnings, and you always want to have a safe space for the rest of your life because you're not expected to. You can't even really talk about these things as if it's negative to have that condition in the first place because we're all just neuroatypical anyway. There's no such thing as a preferred healthier state of being.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. Yeah, you bring up we're all neurotypical. It reminds me of, there was that, Portlandia sketch years and years ago where, the guy, he was like, fat guy, glasses, and he was calling out basically a girl who self-described as a nerd. And he's like, "No, you're not a nerd. Like, you're a pretty girl who wears glasses, and you kinda like, this particular, set of comics or video games," stuff
Mhm.
like that. He's like, "No, I'm a nerd." And he goes through, like, just, all of the, kinda sad stereotypes of, like, what a nerd is. And it's like, no, we're you know, if there's a spectrum, it is a very, very big spectrum, and a lot of people are, uh, not even on it. But yeah, I guess there's some cred that comes your way if you're,
Yeah,
yeah. So
that's the problem. That's I think what's happened. I think now we have enough. The science is in. We have the data on whether or not trans identity, it has some social contagion aspects to it. It irrefutably does, and there is credibility that comes with that. I've seen testimony of individuals who they felt uncomfortable in their white settler colonizer skin, and this gives them an opportunity to transition out of that. And if you think it's not happening there, because I think that for some reason there's a kind of political resistance to want to, like, if you're a progressive, if you're woke, you're not very open to the idea that the trans movement is just a lot of people who just want to be different in a sense. But then you might, so if that doesn't appeal to you, you might be more willing to see the pattern if you look at autism and you look at how many young kids who are basically just nerds suddenly in the past 10 years identify as autistic. But if you know anything about autism, if you've actually known autistic people in your life and you know it well so that you can, not in a clinical sense, but you meet someone, if they're autistic, even a highly functioning autistic individual, you see some of these individuals, you're like, you're not artistic. You just, like you were saying, you just have certain hobbies and maybe you're socially awkward. But like the idea that you think you're autistic compared to, let me introduce you to some,
yeah,
someone who's autistic. I have people in my life who are autistic. And they're highly functioning autistic. So they're the ones that would be most likely, you might say, to confuse with one of these other individuals. There's no
yeah.
confusing them. It's just there's so many people out there that yearn for a kind of neuroatypical label or to just not be normal. And this has been a phenomenon in American life for a while now. I remember when I was a teenager, the version that I saw a lot of at that time was hyphenated Americans. It's like even people that had never stepped foot in Russia, didn't speak Russian, didn't grow up Russian, and had no Russian culture, were walking around, I'm Russian American, because everybody wanted to be it was cooler than to just be plain Jane American.
Were you, are you Ukrainian, American, or, that where
It's kind of
Volodzko was
mixed.
from?
Russian mainly is what I grew up with, but Ukrainian, we were scattered
Mhm,
across Eastern Europe by the communists and by the Nazis. So we ended up in a little bit of everywhere in Ukraine as well.
mhm.
Yeah.
Um, my, talking a little bit about, uh, the trans stuff. So a guest I had on, his name's, Hunter Ash, and, he was, trans for, a number of years of his life. I mean, he transitioned. He was on, estrogen. He got, breast implants, which we talked about, of course, I asked him, "How big did he go?" Because, as a dude, I wanna know, I'm like, "Man, if you had a chance to get titties, like, how big are the titties going?" Um, but one of the things that we talked about in his case is that for him, it was totally a, very much a sexual fetish thing for him. Um, and it was only when he, like, realized that or accepted it, did he really truly start living a happier life. And he, detransitioned, and he has the marks, the scars to prove. I mean, he got, like, his face, his jaw shaved down and stuff like that. Like, he went, he went for it. Um, and I asked him, like, well, do you still have that fetish, that kink, if you will? He's like, yeah, I do, but I, I live with it, and I understand it, and I
What was the reason for so he detransitioned in the end?
yeah, he detransitioned it. So he's been, I
Why?
I don't know how many years, 'cause I think he realized I'm not a woman, I'm not a woman inside,
But if he's still in, I mean, if
if
it's
he's
a
into it.
sexual kink, why not just keep doing your thing? I
I mean,
guess.
I probably have to listen to it again. Uh, I mean, I think he probably doesn't, I would say that he probably doesn't wanna look whatever way that he looked. As maybe he didn't, I don't know if he passed, very well. I don't know if that, if that made things more difficult. Um, but I bring it up to say like, well, you know, if for him, there's a realization that it's a fetish, well, then obviously it's a fetish for other people, and it's sort of like when you're asking, the culture at large to, come and accept you, it's like, well, I don't think you're a woman. I think I know why you're doing this, and if part of it is getting off, okay, I get it.
I think one of the main projects of groups like primarily WPATH and others has been to convince people that although the fetishists exist, they are so negligible compared to the children who might otherwise die at the hands of
Mm,
suicide if we
yeah,
don't give them all of the type of surgery that they want or whatever the story is. That's mostly what we're dealing with. And I interviewed on the Radicalist, actually, if you're interested, I interviewed Mia Hughes, who has a lot of the data here, and she's sort of one of the leading experts in this, and she can tell you, um, yes, there is real body dysmorphic disorder. There are individuals for whom um, surgery might make the most sense, but it seems to be that the majority of individuals are more likely to fall into the bucket that you describe. That's not the narrative that we've been fed.
yeah.
So,
And
uh,
years ago, I read about earlier when when we were talking about power dynamics when as it relates to rape. It reminded me of Alice Dreger's book Galileo's Middle Finger, where she takes on these really controversial subjects. One of them was basically debunking this idea that rape is about power by pointing out, well, yeah, if you look at the demos of the women who are the main targets of rape, I mean, they tend to be, younger, younger women, um,
yeah,
uh, and uh, so they're targets for men who want to have sex with them, and they also did this really interesting thing where they interviewed rapists who were caught and in prison and asked them point blank, well, why, what is this about for
there
you?
you go.
And
Some
and it was
actual data.
yeah, some actual data, it's like, "Oh, yeah, it's sexual, I wanna,"
Yeah.
um, and then the other, one of the other things that she writes about is, uh, the, oh god, he wrote the book, was it the man who would be queen? Oh god, he's a researcher uh, on the trans stuff. He's the one who I think, coined Bailey, his name is Bailey. I don't think he coined autogynephilia, but, he did a lot of research in that community, and was basically pilloried for it.
Mm,
And as like Dreger says in her book, it's like, do you understand like how much work I had to put in to debunk these things,
mm.
right? And like, how many people are willing to do that for all sorts of issues that are just taken as
Amazing.
fact, you know?
Part of it too, I think, is there's this effort, I think, because as we're talking about the fact that a lot of, when they did those interviews with prisoners and they said, yeah, I was looking at these, and I'm thinking about also the Pakistani report that came out in the UK this week, and the showing the targeting these rape gangs targeting not women of any age, not
Mhm.
elderly, young women that these guys would want to hook up with if they could otherwise. So, and one of the reasons I think that the power analysis was applied was to push back against this idea that, well, if it is about sexual attraction, then perhaps, and this is actually what has been used even in courts, perhaps to some degree it's the victim's fault. What was she wearing? If it's about sexual
Mm.
attraction, then you should do something to reduce that. You should cover up a little bit, right? And so I think, so I see where it comes from. I get it. I think that's not the correct argument to push back on those arguments, is to say, "Oh, well, then it's all about power." It's like, no, no, it's not all about power. It's about sexual attraction, but that doesn't mean therefore, you know, there's there's proximal and there's distal responsibility, maybe is not the right word, but so if a girl, let's say, goes to a nightclub in a bad part of town, to party at 1 a.m., and some guy tries to grab her, the proximal or near responsibility is him, and the only legal responsibility would be him. But if that girl is my daughter, there's a more removed, but still a responsibility where I'm gonna say, "Did you know that that was a bad neighborhood? Then what the hell were you doing there at 1 AM? What were you doing? What were you thinking? Of course something might happen." Like, yes, not legally, of course. I don't wanna live in a society where women are victimized and then in some way blamed for it. I read about that in Muslim majority societies where the rape victims are, like, punished. It's insane. But maybe your dad could give you a conversation like, "Hey, don't don't go party in the dangerous parts of town at night." Like, come on, like, that's so there's a way to navigate those 2 positions without coming down on either blaming the victim or, where it seems the power analysis dynamic seems to have fallen, which is to just sort of deny certain truths in order to make it such that you will never be able to blame the victim. And the same power analysis is used in the same way with regard to, let's say, for example, the Black community, so that it, no matter what you might try to say critical about patterns that you see, crime rates or whatever, uh, the blame never seems to fall on the individuals doing it. It can always be reversed back onto. I
Mhm.
remember the reports during COVID where you had Black teenagers in California who like there were a few stories came out of like targeting and in some cases even killing Asian people. There was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment during
Oh,
COVID.
yeah.
And when those stories came out, it was like I remember stories were saying, well, this is because of white supremacy.
There was a guy, Bishop Swan, and I took a screenshot of it because he ended up deleting it at some point, and this, huckster was saying that even when a non-white person commits an act, against a non-white person, it is due to white supremacy.
All right.
So, white supremacy has become basically one of the forces of nature. There's gravity, there's white supremacy, there's I got to go back to my middle school chemistry,
I
the
wrote
strong bonds, the weak bonds between atoms. But that's what it's become. It's
I,
friggin' insane.
I wrote about it recently. I wasn't even really thinking too carefully about it when I wrote it, but one of my readers was like, "Oh, I've never heard it phrased that way. That's good." And I was like, "Okay." What I had said was, what woke or cultural Marxism or however progressive orthodoxy, whatever you want to call it, what it's done to some of the most beautiful, noble movements in human history and some of the things that make me so proud to be an American, like, the civil rights movement, the feminism movement, all of these, it takes them and it essentially turns them into conspiracy theories. There are conspiracy theories now. Feminism is a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory is that men are conspiring and they control in this hegemonic, dominant way the culture at all turns, such that we live in a quote unquote rape culture. I mean, this is a classic conspiracy, like, or if the BLM movement, it mean white people are conspiring the man to hold you down, and pretty much anything bad that happens to you in your life, however small, can be attributed to either white people or whiteness. That is classic conspiratorial thinking. I mean, just play it back for sound, but let's talk about Jewishness instead. Controlling, holding you down at every turn, no matter what. Even you didn't get that job, that's Jewishness.
Dude,
What, you didn't get that raise, that's Jewish. And that girl doesn't wanna go out with you again. I mean, it's everywhere. It can
there's
explain.
there's a guy right now who can't get an erection, and he's blaming a Jewish person out there. The George Soros or whatever, is the reason why some guy can't get his dick hard.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
you know,
This is what you see in these superstructure analyses where, like, everything is to, like you said, like, a deeply, let's say, a racist a fight between a racist Pakistani and an Indian guy, and they're both racistly hating each other, and they get into a fight. Whiteness is what did
yeah,
that. It's like, okay, but then what do we really? I mean, how is that constructive? Even if I was to go along with you, what is the conclusion? Well, we need to eradicate whiteness. What does that mean? If as they claim, it doesn't mean anything bad.
right. Who are the whites out of the Indians and the Pakistanis? Who are the um, but
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, on, talking about, like the rape culture stuff, and I see, some of these reports, especially, of the, the grooming gangs, which I really wish there was call them rape gangs. I really hate that they're called grooming gangs. And it's like, man, if you think we have a rape culture in the United States, what the fuck do you call that? What do you call? I mean, I
Yeah.
saw the headline. I couldn't even believe that it was real. It was a, I forget which country it was. It was a Muslim country. A guy's daughter is raped, and as retribution, the rapist's family offers up their daughter to be raped. And I'm like, I can't believe that this could
Oh,
possibly.
I can do you one better. A girl was raped, and then as punishment, the court decided that the girl's sister would be raped by her brother. These stories are every single one of them is a drop in an ocean of
Yeah.
stories like this. It is endless. If you want to go down that well, there is no bottom to that well. The stories go on forever. And of course, this is always the case, like, but it's America that has a rape culture, right? Like, I would argue if you think if you think America is a really racist country, you're just confessing that you've never been anywhere or that you
Mm,
weren't smart enough to notice these patterns when you went anywhere. The stories that I could tell you about pretty much any country would blow your hair back at how racist some other places are, that if it happened in America, it would be national news for a month. I mean, when these kinds of things happen in America, George Floyd, for example, look at how big the reaction was.
yeah.
Black Lives Matter was like the biggest demonstration movement in American history. They could have had anything they wanted if they had just asked for something less stupid than delete the existence of police.
It was
Just
it was so big that they had a BLM march in Japan, you know? Like, that's how big it was. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
people were willing to do the right thing if they felt was, this is the right thing. Okay, we want to do the right thing. We want to be on board with this. Whatever. Like, generally speaking, yeah, Americans are pretty falling all over themselves to try to get away from being racist. And there's countries where they don't care racism. You think in China the race card scares people out of doing certain
right. Yeah.
No, they wear it like a badge of honor. They're like,
You
"Yeah, that's an inferior race. We're smart enough to see it. What's wrong with you?" Like, th there's no, like, I've had those debates. There's no talking people out of you. They just see you as you're just like, "Okay, this is because you're an American. That's why you think this, not because it's true."
Mhm. Yeah, on the race stuff, and one of my favorite shows, my friends host, it's, Cut the Bull, podcast with Charles Love and, Wilford Riley, and I love
Mm,
those guys, and I love going on, and, one of the episodes that I was on, we were talking about there was some example of a black criminal who had, committed a crime. It's filmed. There's no denying that what he did is wrong, and yet still he had, very much a lot of vocal support, for him, to protect him. And as someone who, I guess, I guess I'm a part of a minority community, being, Latino.
mm,
I said, yeah, there's a thing that I do, like, so my dad's from Argentina, right? And uh, I love my dad, but I can't even take, like, credit for all the good stuff my dad has done, right? Like,
mm,
he did it. I can't take credit for that. Um, I can't take credit for, like, the work of Borges, It's like, yeah, he's from Argentina, but, we're getting more, far further and further apart, right? But if I was the type of person who did take credit for my ancestors' work, right? The minute somebody who, looks like me and is a part of has a similar ancestry, does something and fucks up, I'm pushing that motherfucker out. I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. No, this guy, this is not a representation of the greatness that is who I am, and what I believe." So the idea of, like, embracing someone who is, I mean, lack of a better word, a piece of shit,
yeah.
it's so alien to me. And I see, there's a similar thing that's happening. I don't know if you saw this, but, uh, it was like a viral moment. There's a streamer, I think he streams on Kick, named Raja, who's the son of a really great mixed martial
Yeah,
arts fighter,
I saw
Rampage
this.
Jackson. And yeah, so there's kind of like 3 videos that are a part of this narrative. And the first one that you see, is him going into the ring, picking up a wrestler, knocking him unconscious, and then delivering, 20 plus shots to his face, to the face of an unconscious man. Basically, I mean, looking to murder this guy. And had he not been pulled off, he would be murdered. Like the guy would have died without a doubt. Right. So people are seeing that. It's really messed up. And then all this, justification starts happening. And then the next video that you see is, well, what started this whole thing? And it's the wrestler breaking, like hitting him in the head with a can, right? But it looks staged, and it looks like it's what they would call a work in wrestling. And it turns out the wrestler thought that he was part of this, you know, going to be a part of a new storyline, and that's how you do. Like you do a work, like you start a fight, and then like, oh, you're eventually going to wrestle, right? So then people see that, and they're like, hey, man, that wrestler had it coming. Like he started with him. And then what comes out next is a clip of the wrestler apologizing to him after that, after that incident, saying, like, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry. I thought you were a wrestler. We didn't mean anything by it." Them squashing it, shaking hands multiple times, apologizing. All it's all cool. Then hours later, the assault, the attempted murder happens at the wrestling event.
Was it
And
attempted?
well, I mean, it was
I mean, what I mean is he still alive?
he is alive, thankfully.
Wow,
Yeah, and it
okay.
looks like he was alive, and he was able to, give a message to, to his fans and supporters, and I'm sure he's gonna need a lot of help. Other wrestlers, one of the wrestlers who who tried to, break up the fight and thankfully was successful, he released a message as well. And this is just an example of, I don't see, there's no way you could look at the chain of events as they actually happened and still support the, you know, the brutal criminal in this case, unless you are a racist. I mean, unless you're like, I am going to support him because he looks like me. I
Yeah,
just can't
well,
think of
it's
another way.
I think the analysis for many is, and this is also analysis for many in the original civil rights movement, including some of the legal defense firms, I would argue, is like, look, this is a war, and we're looking like some of our soldiers may not be good people, but if we go around kicking out the bad soldiers and the other side isn't doing the same thing, we're just going to get annihilated. So it becomes a cynical argument of like, we don't really care if an individual was innocent or guilty. We're just trying to push back the overall tide. And so it morphs into this, and it's almost kind of you can kind of like tilt your head and you're like, okay, I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from. Sort of like the argument you hear from the pro Hamas crowd of like, well, how much do you criticize slaves when they break their chains and kill their slavers? It's like, I mean, sure, hypothetically, but then once you get more and more into the details, those arguments start to fall apart in the specific instances. And like, there's this argument of like, well, it morphs into this like by any means necessary argument of like,
Right.
well, it doesn't really matter if this person was a good person or a bad person or whatever, because we've seen you burn so many of our, just to like embrace the tribal thinking for a second, our people you've burned so many of our good people. We're going to just start backing all of our people, good or bad, because we're tired of and all of this is like the engine that drives this is the victimhood mentality, because you have to believe that you are, in order to justify breaking your chains and killing the slave masters, you first have to believe that you're a slave. You have to believe that you are an eternal victim. You have to believe that, you are so oppressed that it justifies, well, I mean, you can look around and see the various things that are justified, some of them pretty horrific. And it's that victimhood mentality. I mean, if you look at the statistics, I'm not the first one to point this out. If you look at the statistics for the Black family in America, the narrative is, well, this is result of oppression. This is why you see that the Black family in America is so broken. You see these high crime rates and murder rates and drug use, all of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Things are not going very well for the Black community. And the reason for this is oppression at the hands of white America. Except if that were true, right, you would expect the worst point to be slavery and then kind of a slow increase from there. Instead, what you see is an increase to a peak and then it plummets like off a cliff. So what happened? And that was a relatively recent cliff. It was like around the 70s and 80s, things started to turn. So what did things get worse than slavery recently in
Mhm.
the last 10 to 20 years? What happened there? And I think what actually happened is you really can't underestimate the power of the victimhood mentality and how far, if you can convince people to really see themselves in that way, um, it's incredibly powerful. I know this anecdotally, at least from firsthand experience. I was a Big Brother. I was in the Big Brother program in
Mhm.
university, and all the people that I was working with, all the kids were Black, and struggling. And they usually had behavioral issues. Um, But more than anything, it was just this, like, psychological attitude of, like, "Why should I even bother?" It they didn't these are, like, kids, they didn't use the old term, "the man," but, it was sort of the attitude of, like, "The man is just gonna make it is gonna keep me down. I'm not
Mhm.
playing the man's game. I'm not playing grades. I'm not doing," like, just to get one of these kids that I really, really connected with in particular, just to get him to, like, do his fractions, which he saw is like buying into some like, just doing good at school was not cool, and that was
Yeah.
a very and no he knew no one in his life who disagreed with that idea, and I
Mhm.
had to just try to, like I couldn't convince him that that wasn't the case. I had to just try to, like, get him to like it on a more visceral level, to just enjoy it, and to gamify it in some way so that he enjoyed doing it, but, like, that attitude, there's just, like, a mental block of, like, "Why should I even bother with any of this?" And it's like, well, for yourself. Like, a
Yeah.
lot of immigrants come over and they have a hard go at it, and it's unfair, and they deal with a lot of racism, and it's really brutal, and they are victims. They lift themselves up by them because they wanna get ahead, and it sucks, and it's not fair. They do it, but some groups take a different path, which is I've seen it with certain on the left in South Korea, I've seen it with Palestinians, I've seen it in the US and the Black community of, like, "Why am I even I'm not even gonna play the game. This is
Yeah.
rigged. I'm out." And that is like a kind of, that is kind of like an ideological cancer. That's really dangerous way of thinking,
Yeah.
uh, especially, I think, for a community that I would argue, the Black community, is like one of the greatest demographic groups of people that has ever existed, that has produced some of the most amazing, aspects of American life, and the most amazing thing. And you just think about how things could be if that wasn't there, but that, you know, Marxism does this is sort of the story. Marxism does this to identity groups as well as to economies. This is pretty this seems to be a pattern with Marxism. It's like it seems to be as effective at ripping through a community psychology as it is ripping through a nation's economy and leaving in its wake not a lot of good stuff. Um,
Yeah, so much of, like, of being a dad is, trying to prepare my kids for, for the world that they're about to, step into. And I mean, so little of my life, uh, do I have, like, one-on-one interactions with losers. Like, I joke that, but really the only times that I really, like, encounter losers is when I go online and fuck around on X, where I'm, like, kinda going back and forth, like, but other than that, my life is sort of, I'm a dad, I'm trying to make, get these projects off the ground, creative works. All of my friends that I have are, various levels of successful and talent, and, people have families that are intact, and all that, and then, I hear these, one-off stories or I see a video like the wrestling one we were talking about, where I'm like, wow, there's still so much brutality out there that I have to prepare my kids for. And then also I see this one video that went out recently is a father, black father, talking to his black son about son's about to go to school and what the how the son is going to deal with disrespect, and whether it's disrespect from a fellow student, in which case you should beat the shit out of the kid, or
That the
disrespect.
father says that?
Yeah. I have to get. I don't have the exact language, but
Yeah.
like basically, don't let anyone fuck with you, which includes the students and the teachers. So if the teacher disrespects you, and it's I was watching. I was like, what an embarrassing example of manhood there. For one, the wife must have been recording it. The angle that they recorded, the dad looked like just a fat fuck with like both him and his kid had just really terrible hair. It was disrespectful for them to have those haircuts. But I was watching that. I was watching that, and I was thinking, um, you know, one, I bet he and I have very different ideas of what disrespect means.
Mhm.
Like I would bet that this guy, if I say, "Excuse me, sir, I was about to pull into that parking spot that you pulled into," I bet he would probably be the type of guy who would take that as a sign of disrespect and
Oh,
would
yeah,
want to
right.
escalate things. And then I was also looking at it just from the perspective of he was giving me this vibe of a guy who grew up, and while he was growing up, he was incapable of handling the bullies in his life. So now he's kind of projecting whatever that weakness was that he had as a kid onto his son. Kind of the same way that, like, dads who couldn't hack it in sports want to raise their kids to be like, a champion and all that. And it's like you're going to live out, kind of like your, I don't know, Steven Seagal wannabe, no one disrespects me, I'm going to kick everybody's ass. And it's a really bad fucking idea to live that way. And the only thing is, and now it puts me in a position just as a dad where I'm like, man, now my kids got to be ready for that. They got to figure out how to deal with somebody who will take, probably the smallest offense, the smallest microaggression, even though we're not using that word anymore, and escalate it to a degree that it should never go. It's scary.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Um, and, uh, and there's not a lot of options for a lot of parents in a situation like that. Like, what do you I don't know. Like, I do see it's funny because you have simultaneously these victim narratives, and yet I keep seeing stories of, like, actual victims of actual racism
Mm,
getting nothing from the media or sympathy that I think they deserve, like victims of violent attacks or victims of, well, rape in the UK. That's a huge story, these days. And I've seen reports that, like, you wouldn't believe of the victims being told to be quiet because if they say something to the press or what have you, then it might stir up troubling racist sentiment that the authorities don't want. So, like, okay, but she was raped. Like,
yeah.
what are you talking
And
about?
this
What?
and this
Where
is
are
what
we? Is this
rapists
the
look like.
UK?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they've really they've
Did
really
you know
lost
yeah, it's like
themselves.
I'll tell you what, if you're a part of an ethnic group and you want people to really not like you, start raping. That's probably I think your action I think, that might be on you, to a certain extent.
And where's the sense of, like, maybe I'm ignorant and I simply don't know, but I look to see if there are, leaders in the community speaking out, and if the community is I mean, this is the old argument, when you hear about, like, Islamic radicalism and people say, "Well, where are the moderates? I'd like to hear from the moderates on this," you know? Um, and that goes both ways with different groups, and so I look for that, and I don't really see it. Same as in America, I look for that with certain communities, woke communities, and I'm like, I mean, I hear a lot of really scary stuff. Maybe that's just noise on X. But then I see the media kind of following the same narrative. And then I see genuine victims not getting the justice that I think they deserve. And I'm looking for these moderate voices, and they're far and few between, especially among the so-called intellectuals that we're supposed to, if we crack open one of the more prestigious literary magazines in the world, and we're supposed to be treated to the views and analyses of these intellectuals, and instead we just get a bunch of like junior high school racism dressed up as pretentious English literature, vocabulary. Like what is
What was
this?
what was the line? And maybe we could, it'd be a good one to go out with, a good visual, from, Doreen St. Felice. She talked about how, like, white boys love big titties and black men are chasing ass or something like that. Um,
Oh,
which I think
black men are hungry for ass.
hungry for ass, and I think that's, I did my 23andMe, and I guess that's where from that, like, 0.7% or whatever from North Africa. That's been the one thing that I guess has really stood out the test of time in my DNA. Is just, I guess I'm black in that degree. I just
I couldn't.
just
That line jumped out at me so much because I go back and forth with my uncle on this, and I had to send that to him, and I was like, "You," because he's very much, I guess you would say, um, I've never seen him not in a button-down shirt. He is very, as you would, and I was like, "Are you," and he's black, by the way, and I was like, "Hungry for ass? What do you think about that? Does that describe does that speak to you at all?" And he's like, "Who," I forgot what he said. It was something like, "Who the hell wrote this? What kind of," and I think he almost was going to I think he almost kind of assumed it was a white person, right? And I was like, "Hey, would you like to see the essay I recently wrote about all this?"
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, David, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning, from the great work that you're doing for FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and uh, everybody definitely follow this man on on Substack. It's the Radicalist, and you're getting up there as far as your rankings. So let's keep that going for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.